finding out more and more information about just how bad things actually are in the country. And for that, we turn to the expert on the data, John Lott, the president of the Crime Prevention Research Center and the author of Gun Control Myths, joins us now. John, as always, good to have you back with us.
It's great to talk to you, Vince. Thanks for having me on.
You've got a piece today in Real Clear Investigations. The headline, Stealth Edit, FBI quietly revises violent crime stats. What are we learning?
Right. Well, just as an aside first, when President Trump was referring to the huge increase in violent crime, he was referring to the data from the Bureau of Justice Statistics, which looks at total crime. And during the Biden administration, total violent crimes increased 55% in 3 years. That's the largest increase over any 3-year period since they started collecting the data 51 years ago. In fact, it's more than twice as large as the largest previous increase, with rape up 42%, robberies up 63%, aggravated assaults up 55%. But what the media has generally focused on is just the FBI data, which looks at just a part of crime. It looks at crimes reported to police. And the numbers that David Muir had and were basically the 22 data was the last year that was available. The 2023 data didn't come out until September. And when the 2022 data was released, and it showed a 2.1% drop in violent crime. And only now, when they did the update, and that was supposed to be the final data for that, but when they did the update, when they came out with the 2023 data last month, they quietly, with no fanfare, with no mention in their press release or the report, had increased that 2022 data from a drop of 2.1% to an increase of 4.5%. In fact, there's only one sentence in their report for 2023 and one footnote that just quietly mentions that they updated the data for 2022 with no mention that it completely changed it from a drop to an increase.
So they only declare in this recent update that was done in September, they only say, by the way, we updated the 2022 data, and that's all they say. But then you clicked in, you actually started digging into the actual data, and you found out, whoa, wait a second, they revised that crime data upward.
Right. Well, yeah, the footnote I didn't even notice until I'd actually found that there was an increase. Kind of the nerd that I am, I download each year their file on the crime data, and I was noticing that there was a difference. That the data, their file this year didn't match the file from what they put out last year, and it was pretty clear that there had been a significant increase. I mean, just give people an idea. Percentages might be a little bit mind-numbing, but what they missed essentially was 80,000, slightly over 80,000 violent crimes. They were off by 1,699 murders. They were off by over 10,000 rapes. They were off by 33,000 robberies. They were off by 37,000 aggravated assaults. And they were off by 198,000 property crimes. So, those are a lot of things to be off by. And I've reached out over the last several weeks to the FBI to try to get an answer for why they made the changes in the earlier data. Over the last couple of days, I've tried much harder to reach out to them. And they won't respond to it, which isn't particularly surprising. I've dealt with the FBI data people many times over the years, and when I worked in the Department of Justice, so that may not be anything new. But they don't, you'd like to have some explanation for why they made such large changes, why they missed these large changes that are there. One thing, just to back up, people think that all the FBI does is simply count the crimes that are reported to them, and that's not what they do. There's some of that, a lot of that. But then they also go and put in estimates. So you have some cities that only partly report crime for part of the year, and then they have to guess what they think it is for the rest of the year after that.
Right.
And then there are other cities that don't report any data at all, and then they have to guess for those things, and they have estimates. It's kind of a black box, particularly on the places that are completely missing. They never explain how they did that, and obviously they decided that they had to go back and revisit their estimates that were there. But I was talking to a past head for the Bureau of Justice Statistics yesterday, and I was asking him, I said, look, if you had put out a report, because they also put out crime data, and it had gone from a drop to an increase, this big of a change, wouldn't you have mentioned that in the press release where you were talking about the new data? And he said, yeah. And also if it had been, he would have mentioned it in their report too. The fact that the FBI, now maybe they're just embarrassed that they made the mistakes, or maybe they're trying to hide it. I have no idea. I can't get into their minds about why they're doing the stuff that they're doing. But you would think that this, we've had a whole year where the media has been having headline after headline based on these 2022 data, saying that crime's falling, but people mistakenly think that it's increasing. So even if you want to just use reported crimes, and you and I have talked multiple times about why that can be misleading,
yes,
and why you want to look at total crimes rather than report. But even if you agree with the media that you just want to look at the number of reported crimes, all these headlines that we've seen over the last year are wrong even by that measure.
Right. In other words, crime has risen dramatically under President Biden. And when you mentioned before that one of the holdups with the FBI data is it's only crimes that are reported to police. But there's one other element, of course. It's only crimes that police departments report to the FBI. And as President Trump mentioned in that audio, there are a number of major police departments in our country who have not been providing data to the FBI lately, right?
Yeah, well, particularly in 2021, you had a huge number of police departments. You had, in 2021, you had New York, Los Angeles, Chicago that didn't report any crime data to the FBI. You had Phoenix that only reported it for a part of the year to the FBI. So you had 4 of the 5 largest cities in the country, which either didn't report crime data at all or only partially reported data.
Yeah, and so that leads to where we are now. You mentioned at the top that there's a difference between the data in terms of what the FBI shares, but and what's called the National Crime Victimization Survey. That's where it's a survey, as I understand it, as you've told me before, where people talk about the ways in which they've been victimized. Those numbers are up dramatically, right?
Yeah, no, for 51 years, we've had this survey. And the reason why we have the survey, which is a truly massive survey, they survey 240,000 people each year. I mean, in politics, they think a big survey is 8,000 people or 10,000 people. And here they do 240,000 people. And the reason why they did this, and they started this over 50 years ago, is because we know most crimes aren't reported to the police. And the only way we know that is by going out and asking people whether they've been victims of crimes. But they just don't take people's word on this stuff when they call them up. They ask them a long series of questions about the characteristics of the criminal, where it occurred, when it occurred, what it involved. And then finally, at the end, they ask people whether or not they reported the crime or not to the police. But you find that about 45% of violent crimes are reported to police. Only about 30% of property crimes are reported to police. And those numbers can change over time. One of the reasons why they change, one of the big reasons they change, is whether or not people think that the crimes are going to be solved and whether the criminal is going to be punished. If you don't think criminals are going to be caught and punished, and we've seen over the last few years a huge drop in arrest rates. If you look at the 5 years before COVID for large cities, 44% of violent crimes result in arrest. By 2022, it was down to 20% of reported violent crimes result in arrest, and only 4.5% of reported property crimes resulted in arrest.
4.5%?
4.5, right.
So, I mean, and I've, and it makes sense to me because if you're in a neighborhood, say, where, bikes are being stolen or something,
right,
and you become accustomed to the fact, like, don't bother calling the cops. It's not like they're going to spend any resources on it. They're stretched too thin. They're not going to be able to track down who stole your bicycle. So word begins to get around and people are like, well, no reason to call. I just guess I lost a bike.
Right. No, exactly. And the thing is, it's gotten worse over time. So, like, if you call up 911 in many parts of this country, one of the things that the operator is going to ask you is the criminal there still committing the crime? And if you tell them no, what they'll tell you these days is that, well, you can come down to the police station, you can wait in line, and we'll have a police report filled out for you. And, you may also get the impression that it's unlikely that anything's going to happen. And so what's happened is that, a few years ago, they would have sent out a police car to where the crime occurred and taken the report. But now they're making it more costly, more difficult, more time consuming for people to go and do it. So there's some people who previously would have reported a crime to the police who are now going to say, it's just not worth it doing it.
Yeah, and the government's throwing up impediments in your way to get to the bottom of it. It's really outrageous. So I shared some of the data today from your Real Clear Investigations piece online. What really stood out to me are the numbers that you shared at the top of our conversation, John. The data that shows from the National Crime Victimization Survey that in the United States, under Joe Biden, rapes are up 42%, robbery is up 63%, and aggravated assault is up 55%. And as you pointed out, that's the largest percentage increase over any 3-year period in the data that's ever been recorded. That's a massive number, and it flies directly in the face of those thousands of media headlines that you've been calling out as lies for some time.
But, the National Crime Victimization came out with its annual report in September. You got crickets from the media. You would think there's this big increase in crime that's occurred during the Biden administration. The New York Post ran a story, the Washington Times ran a story, Fox News ran a story. But outside of them, and maybe the Washington Examiner, I can't remember, also had a story on it. But outside of kind of a small clique of conservative media, it was not mentioned at all. And you would think that it's at least something of a news story to say that total crime has soared like that. Under Trump, it fell by 15%. So it falls by 15% under Trump, and then you have this 55% increase in total violent crime during the Biden administration. And the fact that they just would hang on so vociferously to just the data that they thought, moved in the direction that they wanted. But now when it turns out even that data that they've been pushing for the last year doesn't even show the drop that they've been telling people. I've gone and I've talked to reporters. I've gone to the media trying to get them to write stories on this, and it's just been impossible. That's the reason why I end up writing the piece for Real Clear Investigations. But the data's there.
Yeah.
People can check it themselves.
John, finally, what kind of reaction have you received from this piece today? You often write pieces like this, which are so helpful to our understanding of what's actually going on in the country. What kind of reaction have you received? Have you received any legacy media requests for comment? Are they trying to knock this down at all?
No, I haven't gotten anybody to knock it down. I will say I reached out to Glenn Kessler at the Washington Post, who I've had connection with over the years. And Glenn said, great job, John, ! And said that he had flagged it for his editors there to go and do a story on it. But I haven't heard any follow-up on it from that. I know Fox just came out with a story this afternoon on it, and I believe the Washington Times is going to be coming out with a story on it. But no. But my guess is, maybe Brett Baer will ask about it tonight. He retweeted the Real Clear Investigations article. And, maybe he'll ask Kamala Harris, and that would make it a news item that maybe the rest of the media would have to deal with. Then.
Yeah, we'll find out in the next hour or so if that's the case. In Glenn Kessler's case, isn't he the fact checker at the Washington Post? Why wouldn't he write it?
I don't know, because I don't know. You have to ask Glenn. I'm just telling you what he did.
Okay.
He my guess is he thought this was enough of a news article per se, rather that they should handle it as a news article. Okay. And there've been plenty of regular news articles in the Washington Post over the last year about crime falling.
Got it. Well, I'm eagerly awaiting the Washington Post's A1 coverage of this important story. Thank you very much. As always, John Lott, good to talk to you today.
Thanks. People can find more at our website at crimeresearch.org, crimeresearch.org. But thank you very much.
Crimeresearch.org. There's